Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another financial episode. We are talking with Jennifer Johnson, certified financial planner with Three Magnolias Financial Advisors. They're located right here in Winston-Salem. Jennifer, it seems like we have fluctuated between two different topics over the last several episodes, which is the changing of the stock markets, whether it's going up significantly or down, or it's having dips significantly. We've touched on that. We've hit on tariffs, and normally when we talk in April, it's about tax time. So
Right.
we wanted to think of something that maybe broke from the norm a little bit. I mean, look, if you want tax information from this podcast, we have previous episodes to last April, the previous April before that, where we get into all the things you might need to know to get ready for tax season. And hopefully by the time people are listening to this, they've maybe already taken care of that, right? They've done that, and
Right.
and
That's
uh,
right.
and they don't need to be thinking about that. So we're going to get into a topic that will help people prepare for the upcoming travel season, or if maybe you're still getting ready for spring break and you've got
Mhm.
some upcoming trips. The school year in Forsyth County at least is getting out earlier around Memorial Day. So the travel season is coming up here pretty fast. Before we get into that, though, let's at least touch on what's prevalent now in terms of the financial world. So I want to start with early April. We're recording this on April 2nd. Where are things right now in terms of the market from a big picture perspective?
Yeah. Yeah, they're down. We're definitely down from where we started the year. I think all the major stock market indices are down. I will say it's been pretty orderly, though. I mean, it's not anything we haven't ever seen before or anything like that. It's actually pretty normal market volatility. In that we've talked about this in the past, in that even in a good year in the market, you're going to have these periods of time, if you pull out certain windows of time during the year, in which you'd see the stock market being down 5% or as much as 10%. And we're kind of right in that window now, depending upon which index you follow. The NASDAQ, which follows more technology or growth stocks, has been down as much as 10% during this downturn, mostly related to the tariffs, which we've talked about before. But the S&P is down a little bit less. So we are down, and I know that can sometimes impact people's feelings about travel. I think it does somewhat make people aware, what they're spending. You feel less rich, right? If your market, if your account balances are down. So I think it makes people a little bit more conscious. I mean, the way we look at it as advisors is just kind of part of the game. You're going to have these periods of time in which even a really good quality investment, the price is down maybe temporarily, what typically is a short-term thing, but can make people kind of feel bad. And you may think, hey, it's bad timing, here we are, it's tax season, you gotta think about paying taxes, and then now we want to plan our trip, right? We want to think about what we're going to do this summer. We're going to spend some money. So what we're thinking is maybe people are like, gosh, how can I save some money, on this upcoming trip, which I think is a good thing to think about anyway, right?
Yeah. So this time of year, like you said, maybe people are having to fork over some money for taxes. A lot of things cost more, but you still
Sure.
want to take those vacations. You still want to go to the beach for a week, or
Yeah.
go take a road trip somewhere, go travel internationally, whatever you're planning to do. Like you said, we're always trying to find a way to make it more affordable. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
what I thought might be good to get into today is an area where people try to find that affordability, which is with travel rewards, right? Everyone knows out there that there are credit cards and different programs out there that you can use where if you spend a
Right.
certain amount of money, you accumulate points and you get free hotel rooms or
Right.
free airline tickets,
Right.
or an amount of money you can spend toward airline tickets based on the number of miles and points you've accumulated. So
Right.
today we want to talk about the the things you should know, good and bad, when it comes
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
travel rewards, and maybe no pun intended when we're talking about airline travel, but 30,000 foot view.
Yeah.
What is kind of your general take or philosophy when it comes to getting involved with some of these travel reward programs?
I think they can be good. I think you need to be wary of a few things. One would be the cost, if there's an annual fee to join or a fee to join or an annual fee, for a credit. We'll talk about credit cards here. I think you want to be careful of that. I think you also want to be thoughtful and do some research about how easy it is to actually use the rewards at the time, that you may be traveling. Like we're talking about kind of peak travel season, right? We're getting into the spring, summer, and fall. Some of these rewards, will limit the use of those toward off-peak times. And I think a lot of people get into these programs, looking to save on travel. We've talked about before, prices are up, right? And especially coming out of COVID, we delayed a lot of trips. People were very anxious to get back to traveling. And we've seen prices on travel, airlines, and hotels have really gone up. So I do think it's wise to think about how can I save money, on those things. But what I would encourage people, and what we'll think through today and maybe provide some resources for, or you don't want to pay more than you don't want to pay extra to get a reward that you can't use, right? And I think that's really where the danger, I think, lies.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so we want to get into the things you should look at, because what they're not, all the large print and all the promotional things and the things that smack you in the face about these opportunities is bonus rewards and earn this much cash
Yeah.
back on dining and restaurants and blah blah
Yeah.
blah. And you never, if you don't pay attention to the annual fees and the interest rates of these cards, then you can end up spending more than you would if you just paid cash, even though you're
Yeah.
getting the points. So what are the different categories when it comes to travel rewards? I
Yeah.
mean, I mentioned credit cards, but there's other
Yeah.
loyalty programs out there too.
That's right. Yeah. I think there's three primary categories, with credit cards probably being the most popular. You definitely see airline miles, and those sometimes are linked to a credit card, but it also could be loyalty points or loyalty rewards with a specific airline that you might use the most. There are also hotel rewards. Hotels tend to have brands or brands under one sort of corporate umbrella. And sometimes you can, have rewards if you stay. This is not an endorsement or a critique, but Marriott, for example, so, if people look for, have a certain reward or so many points, with that hotel brand where they stay the most. And I think a lot of that can make sense, right? If you're, some people travel for their job, and so maybe they're earning airline miles because they travel consistently, with their job. Well, shoot, why not be thoughtful when you're planning a trip? If you're like, well, I always fly on a certain airline, or I typically fly on a certain airline, sign up for that loyalty program, right? Especially if your corporate job is paying for your business travel, maybe you can leverage that, for your family's trip. And I think with what we see people are spending on travel, as at the family level or as a nation, it's enough dollars where I think it's worthwhile to look at. And I think those are the primary three areas, where people look to save the most.
Sure. Well, when it comes to the credit cards, and you mentioned airline miles and hotel rewards, I mean, the hotel chains and the airlines, they offer their own branded credit cards. And in a lot of
Right,
cases, and in
right,
a, and in a lot of cases, they will offer points just for the purposes of what they do. So, for example, if you have an American Airlines card, the
right.
money you spend goes toward American Airlines miles and to
Yeah,
pay for travel at some point. But
that's right.
there are cards out there, and you can pick the brand. I mean, Chase is an example, or Capital
Yeah,
One, and there
yeah,
are those out there that offer you points that you can use at a variety of places, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and you certainly will see commercials, advertisements, about these cards and rewards and points, and I think that's the most common. Because, like you said, sometimes those categories overlap. It's a credit card that earns airline miles, or points, and that can be kind of confusing. But I definitely think that can be an area where it makes sense to do. And I think there's some things, especially with credit cards, we've talked about cards before, right? On our program, we've talked about, credit cards and kind of the danger of those. And I think that's something that concerns me too, and that you're encouraged, certainly. I've been on flights before, right? And you're getting ready to land, and they're coming around with an application,
Yep.
for you. Don't you want to sign up and earn these miles? You're already taking this trip. You can go ahead and earn so many miles, so many bonus miles if you sign up for this credit card. I have to believe they're not doing that for my good, right? Like, this is not, they're not like, oh my God, Jennifer has been so great on this flight. We just have to reward her with this great, credit card. It's pushed pretty hard, if you're on flights. You also see tons of commercials, and just online ads and things about cards that earn, miles. And it can be very enticing, but it worries me a little bit in that, what are the fees for that card, right? I mean, I did just a little bit of research, preparing for this discussion, and certainly some of them had no annual fee, but then I saw some with 150 up to $600 an annual fee.
Hmm.
And unless you're traveling a lot, and you're able to really use a lot of miles, you're like, gosh, does that make sense even before you get into the interest?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to accumulate. I've learned this now myself. You've got to accumulate 50, 70, 100,000 miles to be able to get anything of substance out of that.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah,
a lot of flying, or that's a lot of money
yeah.
spent, and sometimes both to
Right,
get to get
right,
to that number. So,
right,
it's not, it's enticing because you sign up and they give you the 50,000 bonus miles and you're like, "Oh,
right.
I'm getting a free trip out of this."
That's right.
And
Yeah,
then and
right.
now, there's a reason why they offer that, because they know that afterwards then it's not so simple. Um so that's an idea of you're kind of leading into, and you've mentioned this at the beginning, of things to be wary of when it comes to signing up for these cards or these loyalty programs. The
Right.
annual fees are the, I mean, that's got to be one of the first things to look at, right?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, like you said, I mean, it may sound great if you get 100,000 miles or something, but if you're paying several $100s up front, or even like in this case, annually with an annual fee, because maybe that works one time for one trip, are you going to do that every year to justify, a few $100s, in annual fees? Like, I'm not sure most of us are, right? And so, I think you'd have to be really thoughtful about how much are you getting for this versus that, fee out of the gate. So I think to make sure what the annual fee is on the card. And I guess I'll say too, just because it does have an annual fee, I'm not saying automatically eliminate that, but you got to consider that, in doing the math. And I think these things are tricky, right? Is to figure out, like you said, and some of them are miles, some of them are points, and so it's just like, what does that really mean in terms of can I place a dollar value on this reward? Is this one seat, on a domestic flight, how much does that really cost versus what I'm paying? Like I said, it's pushed so hard. I mean, just again, don't believe they're pushing that, for our benefit. They're definitely hoping that we'll use that card, that we'll pay the fees, and then not really, most likely benefit perhaps as much. Or you think about too, like we're a family of four, you're a family, I think, of five, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you're like, okay, we've got these airline miles. maybe that helps with one seat. Where does everybody else, like, I mean, you end up having to buy, more seats if you're going to fly and use those points. So I'm sure there's a couple of reasons why these programs are heavily, promoted for us.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because if I get that 50,000 bonus miles, yeah, I can fly somewhere. I still got to buy 4 other plane tickets.
Right. What do you do with yeah, I mean, like you can't hang on to them, right?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, so
Really?
you're debating if you're like us, you're a family, you're like, okay, if we got to go to Orlando, for example, you're like, oh, I could earn these airline miles and we could fly and avoid a
Yeah,
brutal 10-hour car trip with your whole family, travel,
yeah,
cramped into a car. Then you're like, well, I mean, if you still have to buy 3 to 4 more plane tickets, I'm not sure. I'm not sure it works. So I
yeah.
guess I would say to that, I mean, you just have to really be thoughtful about it. Don't just be like, oh, that sounds great, and sign up for another credit card.
Well, and here's the thing too. You don't have to have a credit card to get miles.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think there's a lot of advantage to if you're traveling anyway. Like I gave the example, you're traveling for work, you use a certain airline typically. I mean, most of them will let you sign up for loyalty rewards without getting any sort of credit card or anything. How helpful is it? We're not sure, but if you're going to do it anyway, and then when you go to price your travel, look at that airline, look at how many points, you might have. Maybe that doesn't cost you anything. There's a little bit of work involved, obviously, with it. And, maybe it's not the perfect flight, maybe it's not a direct flight or something like that. But, I do think it's worthwhile exploring some of those things. And same with the hotels, right? I mean, so if you tend to stay with one family of hotels and you're trying to determine where are we going to stay, make if you earn some rewards, maybe you get a free night or something like that. Hotels prices are up from what I've seen. You might save a few $100s, if you can get a free night in there. It's just as long as you don't pay a few $100s in annual fees for a credit card too.
Yeah. So, what's your take on how the interest rate could be something
Yeah.
that
Well,
causes people some issues? Because I would imagine, with when you've got a credit card that gives you a lot of things,
right, right.
the tendency is that it's not going to be very favorable on the interest side.
That's right. I think that's right. I don't think they're being very generous, with the interest rate, which, as we've talked before, I think ideally you don't carry any balance on your credit card that would cause you to pay interest, right? So I think in a perfect world, you're paying that off within that grace period, like typically 30 days. I do think this is a danger area because, as we've discussed before, and we know from data that's out there, there are a lot of us out there that are carrying significant credit card balances that they're struggling to pay off. My guess is this is one of the reasons people end up sometimes in credit card debt, and that they sign up for a card with a reward of some nature, and then it's very tempting to want to use that card a lot. And
Mm.
our brains, from what I have learned, our brains just don't easily keep track of what we're accruing on that card. And so it's so easy just to whip that out, as opposed to old school cash. You open your wallet and you realize I have $60. Your brain processes that differently than when I'm making multiple purchases with my credit card. And so I think there's a real danger in that all of a sudden people have a balance on their card. And I think certainly if you get into where you're paying double digit interest on balances, that has to surpass any reward, that you might have gotten for that card. So I would just, if you hear nothing else from this, I would say, really be wary of using a card for purchases with the idea you're going to get balances. Make sure it's something that you can handle that bill when it comes in. If it's stuff you're buying anyway, and I do it too. We put lots of stuff on a card that gives cash reward back. Do it all the time. It's very convenient. A lot of places don't even take cash anymore. So totally get it. It's just, make sure you're not justifying purchases, I guess is one way to say it, by I'm going to get a reward. So don't buy something you wouldn't otherwise on a credit card to get a reward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's thinking like, well, I don't know if I can afford this, but it's going to be paid back because I'm going to be able to save money when I
Sure.
inevitably book a hotel
Yeah.
room.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I think it's just so easy to justify something, to make that purchase. It pushes you, especially if you struggle a little bit with impulse buying, you got to know yourself a little bit, right?
Yeah.
If that's a struggle for you, maybe the credit card is not for you. Some of the other loyalty programs, like I mentioned, that could work, but I think those are just a real slippery slope when you get into the credit cards.
Yeah. Um, can I pause for 1 second? I've got to,
Yeah.
Nicole's at the front door of the office. I got to go
Yeah.
meet her
Okay.
for just a second.
Yeah, of
Okay.
course. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Be
Yeah.
right back.
Okay.
All right. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. No problem.
All right. Um, okay. So we just talked interest. I'm going to get
Yeah.
to your next point about redeeming rewards.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. So we talked interest, talked about annual fees, and it in some cases, this next point is cut and dry, where if you have a Marriott credit card, you can redeem you can redeem what you accrue for Marriott hotel rooms, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes it's not quite that simple when it comes to, well, how accessible are those rewards, right? Are they
Right.
actually
Yeah.
within your grasp easily?
Right. That's right. I think that's, to me, one of the more challenging things when you use a specific airline, a specific hotel or something like that. How easy is it going to be to actually use these? Are you going to be able to use your airline miles for the time you want to travel? Is there that hotel brand where you want to go? Did a little bit of reading again in anticipation of today, and saw a few just horror stories where people had earned a bunch of points or rewards, for different, different travel programs. And either it's a technology glitch or something, for whatever reason, that online account gets shut down. Where are those points? It's really hard. You're dealing with a kind of a customer service nightmare, to keep those points and get them transferred maybe to a new account. So I think it's worthwhile to really look at the program you're signing up for, especially if you're going to build these points over a long period of time. How easy is it going to be for you to actually use those? It's one reason I've already kind of shared it a little bit. For myself, we just tried to use a card that gives a cash reward that we could then use for, things like a trip. Just because I just didn't want the sort of aggravation, I guess, of trying to keep up with a point system, a mileage system, because to me, it can be very confusing. I mean, and it's hard to know. Well, one, I think airline tickets in general are just kind of confusing, like how they're priced. I don't know if you found that too. Like, just prices vary so wildly depending on
Mm-hmm.
when you book, where you're going, what airport you're leaving from, and where you are landing. It just, to me, it's very difficult to know if you're really getting good bang for your buck in redeeming those points. I just think that's one of the more challenging pieces of this.
Yeah, because sometimes when you want to cash in those rewards, you want to use it for something, maybe something big, right?
Yeah,
you don't want to
it's your
fly
anniversary
from,
trip or
yeah,
whatever. Yeah,
you
you
don't
got
want
to
to
time
fly from Greensboro to Atlanta, right?
it. Right.
You
I
want
know. Yeah. Or Raleigh, right?
to,
You want to
yeah.
go.
Yeah. But
Right.
in order to fly longer distances, you got to pay more money. And to stay in nicer hotels and better locations, you got to pay more money. And that
That's
means you need
right.
more points. And so, yeah, it's a, now there's an article that we will link in the show notes, that helps to explain some of the nuances when it comes to
I thought
points.
it did a good job. Yeah, it really had a lot of this is from bankrate.com. I thought they did a great job really with giving you a dollar value for certain airlines, for certain, points versus miles. Hopefully that'll be helpful for people, because I find it difficult, and this is my job. So I feel like this is going to be difficult, for the common person to know, okay, I'm going to take a flight. Is now the time to reuse those rewards? Like you said, I'm flying from here to here, or do I wait until we, take a big European vacation? Or are you even going to be able to use them then? So I just think it's a it's a tough system to kind of navigate. I thought it had some really good information there, so hopefully that'll be helpful for other people too.
I think so too. So we'll, with the link to that article from bankrate.com is in the show notes. There's one thing that really stuck out to me as we were going over notes for this conversation, because I've been tempted by this particular item before. You go and you try to purchase a plane ticket, you try to cash in your miles, and you realize, well, I don't quite have enough miles. And
Yeah.
so then
Yeah.
the option is presented to you of, would you like to purchase additional miles to
Right.
to to
Right.
to cover this?
Right.
How slippery of a slope is that?
I feel like that's rarely worthwhile. That's my opinion, but I'm always, my red flags go up, whenever they're offering for us to buy more miles or buy more rewards. Because the whole point of doing the rewards program is to save money, not so you could put more money in the program, right? Because you could just buy the you could just buy the ticket on your own, right? I mean, without having to buy the miles. And I think as people look at that bank rate article, you sort of get a sense of the complexity of it too,
Mm-hmm.
which doesn't make sense if you're buying miles, depending upon where you're flying to and from, when, that kind of thing, whether it's a direct flight or not. I mean, does that even make sense to use points for that? So I'm going to be hard pressed to be convinced that you should be buying rewards to save money.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, maybe you're spending maybe you're getting a $500 flight and you're only out of pocket maybe $200, but what you spent that $200 on is not the same value as if you were just to buy the ticket outright.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. I just think it's, and I just again have to believe they're not doing that to do us any favors, right? The reason they're offering that is because there is some incentive, for that airline, that credit card. So it's we just need to be wary, I think, of that. Our antennas need to go up and need to think about that before we do it.
Yeah. All right. The last thing I want to ask you about is something I know next to nothing about. I've never been
Okay.
involved in this before. I've
Okay.
never even explored it, but I know a lot of people use it. And there's just like travel rewards, there are pros and cons to these. And as
Right.
long as you understand the pitfalls and the risks associated with this and you can navigate them appropriately, maybe it is an option for you. But what can you tell us about the good and the bad of timeshares?
Yeah, boy, we could do a whole we could do a whole podcast, on timeshares, couldn't we? And I think probably most people know what they are, but you pay typically upfront and then monthly a lot of times for or annually in some programs for shares or time at certain vacation properties. And I've definitely had clients do these and had friends do these too. I personally have never purchased one. But I've had some mixed experiences with them, right? So some people have had them for a while, they love them, they use them. It's similar to the rewards program we were just talking about. And then a lot of times you have so many points you can use. And then the programs that you'll check into and say, okay, if you have so many points, you can have 3 nights maybe here, or a week here, or one night here. So it's you're sort of buying time in that. I believe this is not scientific, so I haven't added anything up, but my guess is of all the people I have known personally or professionally that have done this, I think more people are unhappy with them than are happy with them. Generally, what I'll hear from people is just like we were talking about with redeeming the rewards, be it an airline, credit card, or something else. It becomes more difficult. Availability is not there where you don't have enough points to really do what you want to do. And then I think one of the things with timeshares that really has been difficult for people is that in many ways you're a property owner, and so a lot of their ongoing fees, maintenance fees that get assessed to you, and yet it's difficult to get out of them. You may have seen some of the commercials and things where groups will specialize in helping people get rid of these timeshares, and the reason that people are in that spot is because they found it difficult to use. But unlike a credit card which you could just cancel, you can't just call me like, I don't want this timeshare, because they're like, well, you have to sell it to someone or sell it back to them. And so it has these ongoing, costs associated with it. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, it does. You haven't changed my mind in terms of not wanting to even get
Yeah,
involved in those.
I know. And what's interesting related to this discussion is a lot of times they'll offer you like a free weekend, at the beach or somewhere else if you'll go listen to a presentation, right? And we have done that. I'll share. We have gone and spent a night or maybe two, I can't remember, somewhere, and that was kind of part of the deal. And it's, they sell hard in there too. And so I could absolutely see, how people would think this is a great idea. We can go to all these cool places that we might not be able to afford on our own. But again, I think people get into it and the expectations don't match, the reality. And then you've got these costs to it. So, if you can avoid buying one, and you can go and get yourself a little bit of a free mini vacation out of it. We're talking about ways to save money. Um, I'm not against that, but just I would say people need to definitely don't buy it right then, right? I mean, you really need to kind of go back, do your homework, think about it. Don't sign up for anything that day, that you went to that presentation, and you're on vacation, so you're vulnerable to buying stuff. So just go back home, think about it, do some research, because it's a big commitment that people don't realize, I think, when they're signing up.
Yeah. Okay. So if you had to summarize everything that we've talked about here, a lot of great
Yeah.
information. But let's distill it down to a few key takeaways,
Points.
maybe.
I think the big things I would share with people is that I think some planning can pay off. I think, if you can look at some rewards, some loyalty points or loyalty programs maybe that can save you money. Absolutely. Think about that as you plan your summer vacation. But you do want to be aware of the costs and how easy it is to actually use some of those benefits. So know that going in. And I think it may just be as easy as look at where you typically what brands you typically use. Is a certain airline you've flown on several times? Are you staying in a certain family of hotel brands? See if they have a loyalty program without costs. And I would encourage people, sure, sign up for that. And then our last point I would say is to really be wary, of timeshares. Really understand, what you're getting into there, and make sure that's going to work for you. Know what your commitment is there. And lastly, I hope people have a great summer, and enjoy their vacation. And I hope this helps them. It looks like we're projected to spend $1.35 trillion this year on travel as Americans. So it's a lot of money being spent there. So just, make the most of it and enjoy yourselves.
Yeah. And don't fill the pockets of the airlines and the hotel chains even more with the credit card companies with the
Yeah,
interest that you don't pay on the
that's
or the
right.
interest that you accrue on these cards. So uh
Don't pay for your trip over like 10 years or something on your credit card.
exactly. Jennifer, great stuff. I enjoyed talking about this a lot more than talking about taxes.
That's right. Yeah. Give everybody a little break from
Yeah.
tariffs and taxes and,
Yeah.
wild markets.
Well, we've got your information in the show notes, but just in case, if you want to close us out here by letting people know how to reach you.
Absolutely. Check us out online. We'll link the website. We're local, as Adam said, so you can give us a ring at 336-701-1600. You can email me directly. My email is my first name, Jennifer, which is JENNIFER at the number 3-magnolias with an S.com. So, yeah, if you're planning a trip, you got something fun you want to plan for, give me a ring. We'll help out in any way we can.
All right. Yep. We always love to support the businesses like Jennifer's that have the 336 in their phone number. So give her a call, and sit down about your own situation for whatever you might have on your mind. So, Jennifer, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of this wonderful spring.
Thanks. You too.